Welcome to the show, Evan Schein. What's up, man?
It's good, Jason. Great to be with you.
Yeah, glad you're here, Evan. Really psyched to get into the conversation around divorce. Pros and cons, how loaded that term is, how that can equal freedom for a lot of people, and other people it can just kind of drag a relationship challenge on for life. And so you have a lot of expertise in this area, and I'm just eager to jump in.
I can't wait to get into it and talk with you about it.
Okay, cool. By way of intro, I know I just read your bio, but it'd be great to for the listener just to get to know you. Tell us a little bit about how you got into what you're doing.
Jason, I'd love to tell you that, I grew up, and all I wanted to be was a divorce attorney, but that's not the case. And I would think that would be pretty odd if that was the case. But the truth is, I love being around people. I've always loved helping people. But my path to doing what I do as a divorce attorney was a little unconventional. I was actually a sports agent for 3 years following law school. And I traveled the road. I was recruiting college football players to play in the NFL. And after transitioning away from that, I loved what I did so much, working with people, helping people to take that next step. I ended up transitioning into family law. I've been doing it for over 15 years. I love what I do. There's not another type of law that I would practice. And, for me, it's to wake up every morning and love what you do and being around people and helping people to hopefully transition from one of the toughest times in their life to what people hope is going to be a much better, healthier, and happier place is incredibly rewarding.
Yeah, that's cool. And what were you like as a kid? Were you, because you kind of took sports and family law there, two trajectories for you. Were you into kind of social relationship stuff as a kid and trying to help people work out their differences? Or were you more oblivious to that and you were just playing sports and then eventually you got something woke up in you about helping people with their challenges, or how did that work?
It's a great question. I would say a little bit of both. I always knew I wanted to go to law school and pursue a career in that. I love debating. My parents would tell you that I was debating people when there was no debate. Like I was, we would be at the kitchen table and I would just be trying to prove points and nobody was really disagreeing with anyone. And so if you ask, the family members, they would say they always knew it was in me to do something in the legal field, whether it was in the sports agency business, pursue a career in law, something. But I loved the legal side. I loved challenging, different perspectives, different ideas. I love the debate. I love and value other people's opinions, understanding people's perspectives, what makes people tick, what makes people passionate about certain things. So pursuing a career in law for me was natural. You combine that with the love of sports, you combine that with the love of helping people. And yeah, I mean, throughout my childhood and growing up, I found myself in different ways, helping people. And look, it's great to be able to combine, things that I'm passionate about.
Totally. That's cool. How do you relate to the frame or philosophy around win-lose? Because that's kind of the game in sports. And then we get into a lawsuit and it kind of seems like someone's going to win and someone's going to lose. And then in a marriage, hopefully we don't set our marriage up as win-lose. I'm curious how you relate to just the win-lose frame.
Listen, I love this question. The court system, by its very definition and nature, it's set up, it's someone versus someone else.
Yep.
Whether it's someone suing somebody for a personal injury lawsuit or a malpractice lawsuit or someone breaches a contract, right? Everything is set up where one person sues somebody else. The problem with that system is in the divorce world, it doesn't change. And so when people divorce and people separate and someone files for divorce, the mentality, if your case is going into litigation in the court system, is still set up as one person versus the other. And the reason it doesn't necessarily work is these are two people who at one point in time got married. At one point in time, somebody said, until death do us part, and I love you and we're in love and we're going to make this work. But it's a family. And it's really about restructuring, and it's about redefining what family is, not pinning people against one another. So at the outset, when people make the decision to get divorced from the beginning and at no choice of either person involved, the system inherently pins people against somebody else. So from the very beginning, that's how it's set up. Then as you work your way through the divorce process, people get very stuck in positions, and emotion often drives the positions
Yeah.
people take. And a lot of times when I have conversations with my clients, people don't necessarily want certain things for themselves or for their children. They just don't want the other person to have it. Right. And so it's
Uh-huh.
how we define winning, how we define losing. What's the
Mhm.
absolute thing that someone needs to take away from their divorce so they feel that they want? That whole mindset really needs to be reframed and shifted. It's not about winning or losing. No one wins in a divorce. You're breaking apart a family, you're restructuring it. It's a time of loss, a time of devastation, a time of transition. Nobody wins. Nobody wins in a divorce. It's about finding the best possible outcome for the
Mhm.
people involved and the children.
Okay. And the reality is sometimes people have hurt feelings and they don't get what they want, and they feel like losers, and they feel like the other person won.
They do. And what I see a lot is those feelings, they stick with people. And what
Yeah.
people don't realize, even when you're separated and you get divorced and you receive that final signed judgment of divorce back, that relationship is not over. If you have children together and you have young kids, that relationship between parents is going to continue, like it or not, for many, many more years to come. There's going to be birthday parties. There's going to be things that come up with your children. There's going to be graduations. There's going to be celebrations. There's going to be holidays. There's going to be things that come up because that's what life is. And you're going to need to reach out to the other parent who you separated from, who you got
Yep.
divorced from. And how you divorce in many ways sets the stage for what is life going to look like after divorce.
Yeah, totally. Okay, let's back it up one notch and say to the listener who's thinking about getting a divorce, there's, I know how COVID kind of brought to the surface a lot of people's relationship issues, and people are either getting stronger or they're breaking apart. Kind of right now, it seems like to me. And if people are listening and they're in the divorce process, they're separated, or they're thinking about it, they're just at the early stages of thinking about it. Maybe let's talk about them first. What are some things they need to be thinking about?
Jason, it's such a great question. I think the first thing I tell people, educate yourself on the process. Educate yourself on the ways to get divorced. You don't have to go to court. You don't have to litigate. Find an attorney who can educate you on your options. Know what the process looks like. Know the options available. Mediation, collaborative law, negotiations. There's many other ways to separate and get divorced. Know what it's going to look like. Talk about your concerns. I always tell clients, make a list. Make a list of any question or concern you have. It doesn't matter if you think it's silly. It doesn't matter if you think it's basic. If it's important to you and it's a question that's on your mind, ask it. Don't be
Yeah.
afraid to ask any attorney that you meet with any single question that's on your mind.
And
And the more,
give us a couple basic questions so we know what you're talking about. Like, what are some examples?
yeah, at a very basic level, what does the process look like? What do you expect from a timing standpoint? How are we going to separate our children?
How
What's
often should we meet as attorney and client? How much does it cost?
100%, questions in terms of the relationship with your attorney. I always say that the relationship between a divorcing spouse and their attorney is one of the most relationships anyone will ever enter into.
Like one of the most important relationships? Is that what you meant?
Yeah, an
Yeah.
incredibly important relationship.
Yeah.
Right. Ask questions. That relationship, you're going to have to trust your attorney. You're going to be working intimately with your attorney on so many important details in your life for the next few years. Educate yourself on the process, communicate, find out how is that attorney going to expect you as the client to work? How is that attorney going to work? What's the attorney's availability? How does the attorney bill? How does the
Hmm.
attorney going to keep you updated on your
Yeah.
case? I mean, one of the biggest things I hear from clients all the time in cases that my firm takes over is my attorney didn't communicate with me. I never felt like I knew what was going on
Uh huh.
in my case. So ask your attorney when things happen. How are you going to let me know? What's the best way to communicate? What's the best way for us to be in touch? How do you want me to send you information? I mean, I think being organized, being prepared, and being educated are some of the most important things that anyone who's thinking about divorce
Okay.
should really give some thought to at the beginning.
Yeah, I recently had some friends go through a divorce, and I was on a three-way voice thread with them for quite a while through the process. And as a person who's never filed for divorce or thought of divorce, it was super educational because one person had been through a divorce already, and this other person had never been through a divorce. And then I kind of got to sit on the sidelines and listen to the person who has experience educate the new person. And it was amazing. It was quite educational. I was like, holy shit, this is complicated. And there were so many variables that the uneducated person was just getting schooled left and right in the process. And anyway, I'm just reinforcing what you're saying here is get educated, right?
Education is key. And the other thing I would say is every family is different. Every divorce is different. Every circumstance is different. And there's going to be so many nuances and things that come up. But I always tell people all divorces, in my opinion, can be handled in a healthy and productive way. Here's the but. Everyone has to, there's a but.
I know
there's
this
a but
but.
that's
Yeah.
coming.
Bring it.
Everyone has to have the same mentality. Generally, there's four people in a divorce. You have the clients who are separating, and you have the attorneys. So many times people come to me and say, Evan, I want to have an amicable divorce, but here's what I want. I want my spouse to get nothing. I get everything, and I want my divorce to be amicable. And
Ouch.
so everyone has to have the same mindset. And as an attorney, you have to manage your client's expectations, because if everyone shares the same goal and the same mindset, how can we get through this in a cost-effective, efficient way with minimal harm to our finances and our children? Everybody's on the same page. But all it takes is one of the four people, the clients who are separating or one of the attorneys, just one of those four people, to change course, to send a letter with a different tone, a nasty tone, do something unexpected, do something where someone
make
feels
threats.
blindsided.
Yeah.
And that mindset totally changes.
Yeah, completely. Okay. What about mediation? And should people also be asking the question, wait, if I'm considering a divorce and I'm really serious about that, should I first look into mediation? Is that a first, or is that a we should mediate and get a divorce attorneys? Like, how does that work?
You're going to hear me say something I think so many attorneys often say is it depends, right? It really depends. During the past 2 years in the pandemic, we've seen an explosion in mediation and alternative dispute resolution because the court system was shut down during the pandemic for several months. The backlog in the court system, it existed to an incredible degree before the pandemic. And during the pandemic, it really exposed and put in the spotlight just how backed up the court system is. So there's so many great ways to separate without going to court. Mediation, as you mentioned, is one of those ways. Mediation is a process choice. And so I tell clients all the time, if mediation is an option and you think it can work, give it a try. Now, there might be strategical reasons you may not want to try mediation. Let's say if there's domestic violence or there's abuse, mediation might not be the best process choice for a particular set of circumstances. But for the most part, try mediation. If it can work, great. And if it doesn't work, litigation in the court system is always going to be the traditional default way to separate and get divorced. But I say give it a shot. The worst thing that happens, you know what? You find out that mediation wasn't the right fit for you.
And let's define mediation real quick. My bad for not trying to make that clear for the people that might be new at this. Is mediation, just my naivete here, someone who's trained to help hold space or have a conversation between the two people who are thinking of getting a divorce, and they're trying to do it, come to agreements around assets, et cetera, and kids and parenting and all that without the involvement of attorneys? Is that the basic mediation?
For the most part. The only thing I would add to it is sometimes in mediations, attorneys are involved. And so but more on the outside, in the background. The attorneys are not front and center that they would be in a traditional negotiation. But conceptually, you're exactly right. You have one highly trained mediator, you have the couple, you have the parties who are separating. And for the most part, that's it. Now, when I work with clients as a consulting attorney, generally I'm in the background.
And is where do these mediation folks get their training? Are they because in my training early on as a psychotherapist and then relationship coach, I never got trained in any kind of mediation. I had to learn how to do that eventually with couples over time, working with couple after couple after couple. I was like, wait, these two can't communicate. Like, holy shit, I got to help them here.
Yeah.
But I actually didn't have a class in that. It was strange that I didn't have a class in 3 years of my master's degree in psychology. So is there a mediation path that a mediator takes and gets training in, or how's that? How do they
Yeah,
work?
there's definitely a mediation path. There's a lot of different trainings. There's different credentials. And I think it's important to find not only someone who is trained in mediation, specifically in family law mediation if possible, but someone who understands what the goals are. And you want to find a mediator who's the right fit. That could be an attorney who's a mediator. It could be a therapist who's a mediator, but someone who the clients feel comfortable with. And the reason I say that, mediation is a voluntary process. And so because it's voluntary, one person has the ability to stop it at any time.
They can just call a timeout, like, I'm done.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. And that's someone who's kind of fed up with the process, doesn't feel like they're getting what they want, isn't getting their point across, isn't being heard. They pull out and they're like, no, we're going to attorneys now.
Yeah. And one of the mistakes people make is in mediation is people try to convince the mediator that he or she is right. And I always tell people, enter the process, have a therapist, have a coach, have someone who you can work with. Don't enter mediation, without sort of other professionals. I mean, I think working with coaches, relationship experts. I mean, I'm a huge fan. I always say divorce is a team sport. I mean, you really shouldn't go into this. It doesn't matter if it's the litigation process. It doesn't matter if it's mediation, collaborative law. However, you're planning on separating and transitioning over the next few years to whatever the post-divorce new life is going to look like, you need a team of support. And you can't do this alone. But if you're going into mediation and you want to talk about your spouse's infidelity, right? Or you want to talk about all the terrible things your spouse did during the marriage, that's not the place and the forum, because the mediation, it's not going to work. It's not going to be successful. And you're going to find yourself in an office like mine.
Yeah, mediators don't fall for that shit, right?
No, they don't. They don't fall for it. And look, the truth is,
hey, mediator, I'm right, she's wrong. Listen to me.
Exactly right. But people,
like, no.
Not only do they not fall for that shit, people like feeling heard, and people like being vindicated. And so people go into that process trying to convince the mediator that you need to be on my side. You see, my spouse, he's the reason or she's the reason our marriage failed. So because she's the reason or he's the reason, you know what? You need to side with me. That's not mediation. That's not what the process is about. Save those conversations for your therapist.
Totally. Yeah. And we here at the Relationship School are doing our best to help people communicate better. So we're doing our part.
Jason, you mentioned communication. I mean, that's one of the biggest things that I see in the process. Unfortunately, why so many divorces go on for 2 years longer than they should, where the process takes a turn and you hear about these divorces that start amicable and then they turn high conflict. People don't know how to communicate.
Yeah.
People don't know how to speak to one another. And you see it not only during their marriages and relationships. I mean, I see it in terms of the divorce. I mean, if people couldn't communicate during their marriage, do you think it's going to get better during a divorce or worse? I say to my clients, and it's going to be worse because the conflicts are, is exacerbated and the emotions are higher.
Yeah, completely. What just for terms, what are some of the more important terms that people need to pay attention to? And I'm thinking of things like maintenance, child support, alimony. What are some of the buzzwords that people need to be tuned into here when going into the divorce conversation?
Yeah, a lot of the buzzwords that people will hear on the parenting side, it's generally custody in terms of custody, parenting schedule. We're starting to see a shift and people are moving away from words like custody because custody and visitation really, people get somewhat offended with those words because people don't feel like you visit with your kids, or custody is a possession and children are not that. So we've seen a shift in terms of moving away from that in the divorce world, but you'll hear the words custody, you hear the words parenting schedule, decision-making, you'll hear the words on the financial side. You mentioned a few of them, alimony, spousal support, maintenance, child support, which are payments with respect to children. And then there's other payments with respect to children, which could be called add-on expenses, such as unreimbursed medical expenses, childcare expenses, tuition, extracurricular activities. And then you have asset division, dividing the assets, whether it's the marital home, whether it's the bank accounts, whether it's the art collection, the wine collection. That's really the asset division. So on the financial side, you have the payments from one spouse to another, alimony, maintenance, payments from one spouse to another with respect to child support, payments for the children. You have that extra bucket when it comes to payments for the kids, extracurricular expenses, add-on expenses, childcare. And then you have, how are we going to divide the assets?
Will you define maintenance and alimony for us?
Sure. So essentially, and again, it varies state by state, but high level and conceptually, maintenance alimony is going to be a payment by the higher earner to the lower moneyed spouse for, and again, there's a whole host of factors depending on the state, but it's really to, whether it's to maintain the standard of living that someone might have been accustomed to over a course of a certain duration based on the length of somebody's marriage. So generally you have one person who might earn more than the other person, and there's a payment that's made to essentially give that lower earning spouse a certain monthly payment for a certain time period over the course of a certain duration.
And what's common there? I guess it depends. Obviously, it's so case by case, but is there an average there over X amount of years or?
It depends because every state's different. Every state has their own formula, whether it's a calculation. Some states will look at factors, but it's really case by case specific.
Okay.
And the longer a couple's married, likely the payments are going to be longer. The greater disparity between the two spouses, the payment is likely to be higher.
Yeah. How do you feel about the traditional marriage where, let's just have a gendered conversation here. Male is the higher earner, wife stays home with the kids, raises 3 kids, busts her ass, and from a certain level is, on an obvious level, she's not making any money, but she's clearly doing as much or more to provide for the family, right? And I think these conversations are really hard because maybe people of my dad's generation, my dad and mom are still married, but my dad was the earner and my mom basically raised the kids. But had they gotten a divorce, there's some men who are like, hey, this is my money. I earned it all. She doesn't get shit here. I'm so curious how you navigate these really emotionally charged conversations, especially when someone actually, they're not going to school and quote, traditional job and getting a paycheck. But like, if we think about any parent staying home with kids and raising them, it's an enormous undertaking. I mean, you understand this as a dad, but yeah, how do you think about these things in your own head, and then how do you work with them?
Yeah, I love this question because I see it play out day in and day out in my practice. I hear people say, well, it's my money or it's my business. And I think the way I address it as a divorce attorney from the beginning, I explain to a client, what does it look like, right? Assets you come into a marriage with, that might be someone's premarital assets, premarital income. But generally, and again, it varies state by state, but I explain to people what marriage looks like in terms of the assets you accumulate from the date you were married until the date one of you filed for divorce. But very early on in the process, I try to change how people think about money, assets, property, right?
Okay.
Because if not, those thoughts are going to continue throughout the process. And getting someone to move away from, well, that's my money or my business, or getting someone to appreciate the value that, in your example, a stay-at-home mom, raising kids, that contribution, which, as you mentioned, is incredibly challenging and just a tremendous amount of work. I mean, that's real. And in no way should that be minimized. But if you don't address it early on as an attorney, you're not managing your client's expectations right. And I think it's important at the beginning to have your client or explain what the process looks like. What is a court going to consider? A court's going to look at what the contributions are of both spouses. And the fact that one spouse may be the business owner or the spouse who earns either 100% of the income or the lion's share of the income, marriage is a partnership, right? When you get married and you sign up and, for this life journey, it's a partnership. And whether that's two people working outside the home or one person working outside the home and the other person working inside the home and raising children, that contribution is 100% recognized by the courts. It's recognized by the statutes. It's recognized how we as divorce attorneys divide assets if we reach an agreement. And it's recognized by the judges when they make decisions. And so because it's recognized in terms of everything I just mentioned, it's important that clients change that mindset in terms of, well, this is my money, my property, my business, because it's not.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like you could say that the stay-at-home mom could say, these are my kids because I've been with them the whole time. So
that's exactly right. And that's a great point. And I might steal that because, but by using that example, looking at it from the other side of the coin will definitely help shift someone's perspective on how they see things.
Hey, pardon the interruption. Thanks for listening. I want to tell you about our coaching program briefly. Some of you are helpers, right? You're a natural born helper and you're not getting paid yet to help others. You have not taken the leap to become a relationship coach. I want to really encourage that you apply and you start really chewing on that and thinking about it. You can work for yourself. You can work from home right where you're listening to this, and you can get paid really well. If you want eventually making six figures, or you can just have a nice side income to supplement your job, gives you even more job security. So here's what Brittany had to say, one of our recent graduates who's now a relationship coach.
Hi, my name's Brittany. I'm a newly certified relationship coach with the school, and I wasn't always aware that I was going to be a coach. This was a path that I naturally stumbled upon through my own pain. And once I took deeper and really felt this ultimate transformation that I've never felt before in my life, I was like, sign me up, whatever program's next, I'm in. And that's how my journey to becoming a coach began. And gosh, I am so happy I kept down that path, because if there was one thing that I can say about the RCT program, it's that the growing doesn't stop. It is a program that will push your edge and continue to hold your feet in the fire so that you can become a better leader, a better coach, a better mother, a better facilitator. And that's really what the program was about for me. So I'm walking away feeling like I am all of those things. And being a coach is just one more skill on top of that. But the fact that I can really hold the space for other people and give them the transformation that I've received from the school is everything. And that has become my mission. It's become my purpose. Once I received this transformation, I just want to give it to others. And I've been in a lot of different programs. Be prepared to transform yourself while you transform others.
All right, awesome. Hire Brittany, guys. Check her out, relationshipschool.com/coaching if you want to hire Brittany, and she can help you out, okay? Now, if you're interested in going through what Brittany just described, a transformational journey to become who you are and help other people with their relationship pain or challenges, join us, relationshipschool.com/RCT if you want to apply. All right, back to the podcast. Do you think people in that kind of conversation where it's like my money and blah, 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 and they go, okay, they finally acquiesce and they go, okay, fair is 50-50. And let's say we've got 10 more years of maintenance and alimony, and then there's child support that I agree I will pay X amount. And then there's some people on the receiving end, just to play devil's advocate here, that might take advantage of that and then not actually sort of do anything with their life. Is that an argument people get into or not really? Is that too kind of loaded? And
no, the argument, one of the arguments I see is, well, that person can go get a job. That person
exactly.
has a degree. That person could go get a master's degree. That person could, go
finish
out
their
and
undergrad
work.
and then,
So Yeah, people feel that and they see that once they start realizing what the financial obligations that one person might have to pay. But generally, what I tell people is whatever the other spouse is going to do with his or her life, they're going to do. Your obligations are going to be your obligations. Whatever payments you might have to make, you're going to make. If the other person wants to get a job, they'll get a job. If the other person doesn't want to get a job, you know what? They're not going to get a job. At some point, it doesn't become your problem anymore because
Yeah.
you're separating, you're getting divorced, and how everyone lives their life going forward, it's going to be up to them.
Yeah, I love that because it would be such a headache, and I see this happen in couples where the earner is now resenting the person because they won't go get a job, and now they're stuck in that same game of blaming and wanting them to change. And it's like, look, you got married, you accepted the consequences, you didn't do a prenup or whatever, and here you are. You know, like
Yep.
this is the program.
Well, and the other
So
thing in your
yeah,
example is that in that exact situation, in many ways, that person wanted or may have wanted their spouse to not get a job because
right.
there was a benefit in allowing that person to start a business or go out at night or network or develop connections or start multiple businesses to be on the road and to travel. Then magically, when someone's getting divorced, it's, oh, by the way, that person has to go get a job. You can't have it both ways.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you. What do you think about prenups, and what do you recommend there for people thinking of getting married and they're like, prenups, is that the deal? And should we, shouldn't we?
I can talk about prenups all day. I think the prenup conversation is one of the most important conversations a couple who is thinking about getting married can have. And
Mm,
here's why. Talking about finances and money, it is one of the hardest conversations for people to have. It doesn't matter if you're thinking about getting married. It doesn't matter if you're 25 years old and you're going into your boss's office to try to negotiate a higher salary. It doesn't matter if you're talking to your parents about money growing up. Talking about money is something nobody wants to do. Now, try talking about money with someone you're about to get married with. That conversation is going to be incredibly hard. Here's what I tell people: that conversation about a prenup can be a life changing conversation for the better.
yeah.
For many people in their 20s and 30s who are getting married, they might not have talked about money, assets, expectations, where they want to live, how many children they may want to have. This conversation may be a springboard for all these hard conversations. And if you can get through the prenup conversation, the prenup process, I'm going to bet that you can get through so many difficult conversations
Totally.
that may come in life. Because look, people don't talk. People want to. I mean, people want to avoid the difficult, the challenging conversations, and so the prenup conversation is generally one of them. What I've seen in recent years, people are getting married later in life. I'm seeing people getting married much more, uh, much older in life, and people are accumulating more assets. I'm also seeing a shift in society. People are pursuing entrepreneurship much more. People are pursuing things in the startup world. People are, millennials have a different view towards marriage. And so the conversation for many people is becoming much easier. Divorce is not taboo anymore. The prenup conversation is not taboo anymore. Doesn't mean it's easy. Doesn't mean that everybody's excited to have it, but it's not as difficult to have as it once was 15, 20, 50 years ago. And if there's a reason to talk about prenups, do it. Even if you don't know if you should be having that conversation, goes back to what we said before. Educate yourself. Speak to an attorney. Explain your financial situation. Do you own a business? Are you coming into the relationship with substantial assets? Are you coming into the relationship and you have family wealth, or your family might own a business? Is there a business you may want to start during your marriage? Have the conversation, educate yourself. I'm a big believer in prenups, and I think it's an incredibly important conversation that should be had before people get married.
How do you define prenup?
So it's essentially, a prenup is an agreement that people can enter into before they get married that could address some of the issues that people may face without a prenup in the event of a divorce. A prenup can protect certain businesses, certain assets that would otherwise be on the table if parties separated and got divorced.
So
And
if
you can, yeah.
let's say I'm just making up a fictitious situation here, but let's say Ellen and I, my wife, let's say we did a prenup, and part of the prenup was, hey, I came into this situation with this big piece of real estate, and it's worth a lot of money. And the prenup that you're going to sign basically means if we get a divorce, you don't get any of that. Is that one example?
One example, and a lot of times people will enter limited prenups to just address that exact situation. There's a piece of property. That's right. Otherwise, people might want to address a few things, whether it's maintenance and alimony, which we talked about, businesses, real estate,
Debt,
marital home, debt, student loans is a very popular
student
thing
loans.
people
Yeah.
will
Oof.
put into these agreements. And without a prenup, that piece of real estate, let's say you got married and got divorced 15 years down the road, that piece of real estate when you got married was $1 million and it turned into a $10 million piece of property. That $9 million appreciation on that property, all is going to be subject to divorce.
Yep. To whatever happens between us, right?
Whatever happens. And let's say you built a home on that property, complicates it even further. Let's say you lived in that home on that piece of land, complicates it even further. So there's so many variables and factors that could cause people to have an expensive divorce, litigating and fighting over something that could have been easily discussed and
Right.
protected
Prenup.
and negotiated in a prenup.
Okay. Damn, that's good. I didn't do a prenup.
You're still protected.
Yeah. Well, Ellen and I, we like to think that our commitment was sort of like we're going to treat each other so well over so many years, and we trust ourselves and know ourselves that we don't need one. And some people could judge that as irresponsible or, look, dude, just go through the motions and do the damn thing. And it feels still really good that I'm like, I don't have any ounce of me that's like worried about any of my assets because of, let's say we have a falling out and we get divorced, because that's certainly a possibility. I don't think that's going to happen with us, but you never know, right? Life happens. So it's interesting. I wonder if you would think that if two people can be mature enough and respectful enough, is that enough to not have a prenup, or is it still like, no, dude, don't just do a prenup?
I think I think people need to have that mindset
Yeah.
first and foremost, right? It sounds like the two of you had that mindset. You were on the same page with how you thought about not only the marriage, but how you thought about life and really everything from the beginning. I think if you have that mindset, would I still recommend a prenup? I would, right? And I'm looking at it from the perspective that I have as a divorce attorney, because I've seen what the other side can look like. And so that's
totally.
my mindset. So I look at it as a worst case scenario, but I think it's possible. Look, at the end of the day, I think generally one person does want it. And so that's what drives the process.
Mhm.
If two people are on the same page, and I have this all the time where two people have the same mindset or they may think they need it, but then decide, you know what, we're not going to go down the prenup route after a consultation or getting more information because they trust each other. They didn't think it was best for them, emotional reasons, personal reasons, financial reasons, whatever the reasons may be. Look, it's definitely a possibility. But the most important thing, I think, trust is important. I always look at it and say, err on the side of caution, but that's the perspective that I have.
Yeah, no, I think it's wise. I actually support your perspective wholeheartedly, because I'm on the receiving end of countless people struggling in their marriage, right? And they can't figure it out. And it's 1 in 2 marriages still ends in divorce. I mean, I think that's still the more or less the numbers that still kind of, are we still doing a 50-50 kind of number? Is that still the stat?
Pretty much. And it could be high. Yeah, pretty much 50-50. Yep.
Yeah. And it could be higher, right? Like we also know, I always like to say, well, let's look at we never talk about the 50% that are still married. It's not that they're happily married. There's a lot of sufferfests out there that are just biting their tongue until their kids, leave the house, or just kind of like muscling it through because that's what you're supposed to do because the church told you so or something.
Yep.
So just because you stay married doesn't necessarily mean you're in a fulfilling situation, right?
100%. And two things that I'm seeing so much more gray divorce. People are living longer. You mentioned this scenario. People might stay together for the kids. Kids are out of the house. I'm seeing so many couples in their 60s and 70s now get divorced. People want different things in life. People are now living until they're 80, 90,
Right.
100 years old. And so one of the reasons divorce was so taboo so many years ago, the life expectancy was people were living until they were 50, 60 years old. So nobody was getting divorced when at a certain point because the life expectancy was not that much greater.
Right.
So life has changed. And so you're seeing more and more people later in life get divorced. And that's been a really interesting trend to watch over the past 2 years. But I was erring on the side of caution. I look at it as life insurance on the marriage. Trust me, I know it's not sexy, it's not romantic, but you know what? Take your prenup just like you take an insurance policy. You put it in a drawer. You never think about it again. You never look at it again. And hopefully you live happily ever after. And if you don't, you're happy to have the agreement.
Yeah. Okay, two more comments on the prenup here. One is I'm with Evan, and for the most part, that like I just think it's good like insurance almost. Going into what is likely going to get hard. A marriage gets hard over time when the honeymoon and the drugs wear off. 2, 3 years, 5 years, you have kids, job stress, COVID. Like you get triggered and annoyed by this person, and it's going to get hard. And that's why we teach what we teach at the relationship school, so you can work your shit out. Please do that. And at the same time, I wonder if some people use a prenup as a little bit of an out. I wonder, like, well, I have a prenup, so, it's not that big of a deal to get a divorce. I don't really have to work that hard on this marriage. Do you think is that a possibility here?
Of course. Yeah, I think it is. I think two interesting things come to mind when you ask that question. I think in many ways, therapy and couples therapy has become so normal for people. There's so many ways in which people are willing to work on relationships in therapy, in counseling. Yet at the same time, I think people are also very quick to say whether it's because of the prenup or whether it's because of the way in which people can date nowadays and meet other people or life in general. People might not stay in certain relationships and give it a try compared to years past. So I think you have both of those things that are happening. And I think prenup might be an easy out because people, if you have a prenup, you can look at it and say, well, we already negotiated 75% of the divorce. You know what? I'm not going to have to go through this 2-3 year expensive divorce battle. Most of it is done. So I think you're right. People may look at this and say, you know what? I already have much of this negotiated. How can I get out of this as quickly as possible?
Yeah. Yeah, that's probably less people, but it's still there, right, for some. A couple more questions as we wind down, Evan. Some people I see get divorced, and for a lot of people, the fantasy about divorce is I'm finally going to be free from this person. And I think when you don't have kids, that might be true. It's like you could kind of get away with not ever seeing this person again, potentially. But when you have kids, as you pointed out early on, you're hooked in with this person for life. And I've seen a couple cases in my own circle over the years where the divorce was brutal. The person thought it was going to equal relief and my life, I can get on with my life. The divorce was brutal. And then the post-divorce life and lifestyle is brutal still to this day. It's hard. Everything is hard about it. They have kids, and it's like kind of a daily nightmare. And I don't want to scare people off here, but I do want to get a reality check from you about divorce doesn't necessarily equal freedom for a lot of people. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, Jason, it's such a great question. You're right. People think divorce, and you get that signed judgment of divorce, and sure, there's relief. You may have gone through a 2-year, 3-year, if not longer, lengthy divorce process. And so you're so happy, you're so relieved that what was such, or may have been such a traumatic, life-altering, life-changing, destructive, devastating, sad experience is now in your rearview mirror. The problem is when you have kids, you're tied to the other parent. You need to communicate with that other parent, whether it's by text message, whether it's by email, or whether it's in person or on the phone. You're going to need to communicate. You have kids together. You need to facilitate the relationship. You're going to need to spend time together, and you need to figure out how to make that work. And so because I see that, and I see just how hard it can be for people because the divorce may be finalized, but the relationship is not. And I think that's the mistake in terms of the mindset that some people have, which is you have to see the forest through the trees during the divorce process. But what I mean is, because you know this person is going to be in your life, recognize that. Find a way, if you can, during the divorce. If it's not a big deal, show some flexibility. If someone asks you for something and you can make it work, make it work. That person might owe you something in the future, right? Be flexible, be accommodating when you can. Even if the other person has not been flexible and it hasn't been reciprocated, it's going to go a long way into the co-parenting relationship and life after divorce. People think it's, I'm divorced, you have the freedom, now you're going to sort of live whatever life you want, but you have kids. And when you have kids and there's another parent, you're going to need to know how to communicate with that parent. If you think that's going to start in post-divorce life, it's a mistake.
Right.
It starts during the divorce process. If communication was an issue during the marriage, change that course. You can fight about a lot of things, assets, money, but find a way to effectively communicate with with the other co-parent.
Absolutely. I'm such a big fan of that. Yes. And again, to plug ourselves here, we got lots of ways for people to learn how to communicate better and listen better and be more flexible, like you're saying. I love that. And then just to keep balancing it out, because I kind of like that we're talking, we're weaving our way through kind of the pros and cons of all this stuff. I think some people think the term divorce is sort of a negative label, and now they have this, I don't know, I'm broken, or I failed, or something. What do you say to people that think that?
I think divorce it's a time of transition. I mean, I think it's a loss. I think for many people it's sad, and I think it's important to recognize that. Now, I also think people can pick themselves up and move forward in a very productive, healthy way. I think you mentioned whether it was 1 out of 2, 50%, whatever the statistic might be in terms of the divorce rate. The truth is, people who go through the process, they're not alone. People are much more willing to talk about their divorce journey, their divorce process, their marriage, what the process was like for them. So there's so many resources out there today in terms of different professionals, different experts, different resources to really help people get through that process. So I think we've seen a shift from, I can't believe I'm going through a divorce, or, oh my God, I'm going to be divorced. And what are the implications? What are the labels? I'm going to lose my friends. I'm going to lose my social circles. How am I going to be viewed? Am I going to be judged? How are people going to react? What are my kids going to think? I think as a whole, that's changed. I think people should embrace what life and what the road is going to look like for them going forward. I consider it a restructuring or reforming people's family. And sure, you may be divorced, and that's okay, because what life is going to look like going forward, whether it's happiness or joy, it's going to be a different path, not the path that you had hoped for necessarily, not the path you had expected. Doesn't mean it can't be equally as great and if not even better.
Yeah. Thanks for that. That's cool. Evan, where can people find more out about you, your firm? And you have a podcast, I think, and I think that would be a valuable resource for our listeners.
Jason, I appreciate it. So I'm a partner of my firm, Berkman, Bodkin, Newman, Schein. We're a matrimonial law firm in New York City. The website is berkbot.com, BERKBOT. I know you mentioned the podcast. The podcast is the Shine On Podcast. It's a lot of fun, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, cool. And we'll put all that in the show notes. 2 more questions for you as we depart. One is just came to me as you were saying that you're the name of your firm. My son, if he were here, he would have the question. He's like, why do all law firms have 3 last names in it?
Yeah, I mean, it might be the first time I'm actually at a loss for words, and it's a great question. So the initials in our logo is essentially BB and S, but we tried to keep it to 4 names, and so but there are firms where 5 names, 6 names, some of the names you can't even pronounce. So tell your son it's a great question. We tried to keep it as simple as we possibly could.
Right on. And if I always ask my guests this, if one of our missions is to reach a lot of young people because, with all that's going on in the world, and we want young people to have resources to communicate better and work out their differences and have healthy relationships into adulthood. And if I had a room full of 1,000 teenagers, let's say, and I could only teach them one thing about relationships or love, what would you want me to tell them?
Wow. I love this question. I would say give it some thought. Really think about what your expectations are. Be open. Life's a journey. And I think, give it some thought on what you're looking for and be open to endless possibilities. Love is one of those funny things. You never know what it's going to look like. You never know where you're going to find it. Be open and see where it takes you. It's an incredible journey, and be open for the ride.
Yeah. Amen to that. Cool. Evan, thanks again for your time and all your valuable experience here. I think the listeners are going to appreciate this, especially those of you listening who are thinking about prenups, or thinking about divorce, separation, mediation, all that. I think this has been awesome. So thank you.
Jason, I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
Okay, you have 2 action steps here. Write down your biggest takeaway, especially if you're thinking of divorce, okay? If you've gotten a divorce, write down your biggest reflection about your own experience and as it compared to this divorce attorney's opinion and experience. If you're thinking of getting married and you're talking the prenup conversation, go have that conversation. Like, hey, are we doing prenups? What's the story here? What's the program? Lots of people do prenups. I think it's a wise insurance strategy, given the stats on divorce, right? That 1 in 2 marriages ends in divorce. It seems prudent to do it, even though I didn't. Yeah. And I'm curious. I would love to hear from you if you feel like really going for it. Share in our private Facebook community. That's relationshipschool.com/community. What you thought and how your experience was, similar to what Evan was talking about or different. I always like to learn from listeners about your experience. Yeah. So share with us. Okay. Cool. Thanks, everyone. Have a beautiful rest of your day, morning, evening, and we'll talk very soon. If your spouse or partner has threatened to leave you, or you've already been broken up with, or you're thinking about breaking up with your significant other, or maybe even contemplating divorce, I want you to do a few things first. Go to relationshipschool.com/rescue. All right. That way you can rescue this thing if it's salvageable. All right. I wrote a very elaborate PDF ebook, and I recorded some videos for you to save your relationship. And I think it's a really good thing to, at the very least, go through this course. Now, if you just got broken up with it, the relationship just ended, you'll also want to do this if you want to salvage or save the relationship. relationshipschool.com/rescue. As you know, I've dedicated my life to helping people with their relationships, right? I want to solve this problem so that all of you can work through your differences and have fulfilling, amazing, badass partnerships and relationships, family, coworkers, friends, whoever. And I have trained a ton of relationship coaches, almost 100 certified relationship coaches, to help you specifically work through your relationship challenges. So I want to invite you to a special deal we're offering to the podcast listener, where you can get 50% off your first month of coaching with one of our amazing relationship coaches. Okay, if you're tired of therapy, it feels like that's going around in a circle, or you want to actually set goals and accomplish your relationship goals, hire a relationship coach. Okay, go to relationshipschool.com/get coaching now, and then use the coupon code FIRST50 to get the 50% deal off your first month of relationship coaching. Super psyched to have our amazing coaches serve you and help you get to the next level. Hey, thanks so much for listening. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel. Share one of these videos with a friend. We want to help the planet get their act together around relationships, and you are one of them, so thank you.